On this particularly bright autumn day, Wanda and I set off on a lazy afternoon jaunt. My energetic furry friend Otto had decided to tag along at the last minute, and he raced alongside us with the tatty end from a brightly coloured sock peeking from between his teeth. I didn't have the heart to tear it away from him. We were all used to Otto's habitual sock stealing, and I'd noticed recently that he had a particular love for my thick, striped woolen ski socks. As the walk began, Wanda and I talked about nothing much at all, and the conversation had natural peaks and lulls without any awkwardness. This was something I always enjoyed about spending time with Wanda. Often she would give me an interesting overview of a historical event that I knew little about, or we'd share notes in a book we'd both read. It was, as I often thought, as if we'd always known one another. That day, we took a long and meandering route towards the Whispering Woods, a part of the forest where the silver birches whispered. I found it so funny that Lyra always claimed that the birch trees mostly whispered about the same old gripes and groans they had 50 years ago. Like so many of us, the trees were set in their ways when it came to their troubles. Wanda was a little less sure about the Whispering Woods than I was, but she seemed much more comfortable with the magic surrounding us the longer she spent in Nightfalls, and I enjoyed watching her confidence grow. Though our chatter was comfortable, our walk did have a vague purpose, as I was keen to take Wanda past the Whispering Woods to the clearing where my orchard would grow. Though I'd made excellent progress in growing a simple selection of fruits and vegetables, I still had lofty plans that were possibly beyond my current capabilities. The soil in Nightfalls had always been remarkably fertile and imbued with magic, so I knew any trees I planted would grow quickly, and we were on a mission to find new saplings. This would allow the orchard that still lived solely in my imagination to come to fruition. Yes, I had grand plans, but I had learned that there was no rush, and the falls would lead me in the right direction with a gentle steering hand. I'd brought Wanda because, although Lyra had extensive knowledge of flora and fauna and would have been the most obvious choice, Wanda had revealed one night that her father had been a keen arborist. She said he had possessed an extraordinary depth of knowledge about trees, something she hadn't appreciated so much as a child. With a single glance, he'd been able to identify a species by the shape of a leaf, or the pattern in bark, or the way the branches reached towards the light. In fact, Wanda's father loved trees so much that the whole family lived for many years in a small timber cottage built around the huge trunk of an ancient oak tree. The tree's branches curved over the roof, and inside the rooms followed the tree's shape, with winding staircases, carved wooden shelves, and tiny doors. Wanda said it was the one reason she felt so at home at Lyra's cottage, and in Nightfalls in general. She was used to feeling very close to the trees. Anyway, when Wanda had divulged this, I'd implored her to help me explore the forests in search of saplings. We followed the winding path until we reached the vast pine forest that lay along the northern ridge. The earth softened beneath my feet, and I knew we'd arrived at the Whispering Woods. Here, the towering trees whispered to those who listened closely enough. There was always a mystical heaviness to the air before the peak where the wood was located, and then an enchanting kind of light that danced around the trees. I heard the chatter from the woods rise and fall around us, and we fell into a steady rhythm, moving past the trees. The first time I'd entered this mystical place with Devani, it had taken a while for the woods to truly open up to us and reveal their power. But now I could hear the to and fro of conversation as the trees chatted, or sang, with a lyrical ease. If I tried to concentrate and understand what the exact words were, they slid away and I struggled to grasp them. I understood that the trees spoke another language, one I hoped very much to understand one day. I kept my eye out for any new saplings I could move to my orchard, and as we walked on, and I started to feel the muscles in my legs ache with exertion. Finally, we reached the edge of the whispering woods, and the air seemed to shimmer. It was like a door made of blue, and I knew without a shred of doubt that it was the primordial power tempting us in. All thoughts of saplings left my mind for another day. "Shall we?" I asked Wanda with a smile. Wanda was sometimes a little reticent. She certainly didn't feel the deep need to explore like Devani. Her worries sometimes took her over, but deep down she was incredibly brave, and the longer she stayed at nightfalls, the more she seemed to understand that magic would lead us toward the right path if we learned to trust it, and ourselves. Wanda nodded slowly. I went first, and as I walked through, I looked out at what seemed to be the edge of a beautiful mountain village. It was bathed in a warm golden light with idyllic cobbled streets that twisted away from us. Everything seemed to glow with the comforting warmth of late afternoon, and I experienced a strong sense of welcoming, quite similar to when I'd first arrived at the falls. We were somewhere far away, transported by magic, and I knew that this place was no ordinary village. I looked over at Wanda, and she wore a dreamy smile that was quite unlike her usual expression. I chuckled at her lightly, and she came to, giving me a stern nod. Wanda and I walked on through the village. Our footsteps made soft taps as we marveled at the tiny fountains that flowed in the quiet squares. I noted the beautiful balconies overhead, overflowing with trailing geraniums, and the pretty little rows of stone houses. Everywhere was peaceful, with just a touch of movement, like the flutter of lace curtains at the open windows and the distant chime of a church bell that carried on the mountain air. The lanes had swinging wooden signs indicating what each shop sold, and people lazily moved in and out in no rush at all. Many even greeted us with a smile. "It's like a fairy tale," Wanda said softly beside me as we walked. "Isn't it?" I replied. I peered into a shop window and saw reams of silk in every colour imaginable, a shimmering rainbow wall of fabric. The materials reminded me of Devani's paraglider, and as was my favourite habit, I picked out little details I knew Devani would love, thinking about the stories I would tell her later. Wanda saw me looking, and I think she understood just how much I saw the world through Devani's eyes these days, though she didn't say a word. Finally, we came to the end of the lane, and I saw the last shop, which was tiny, hidden away and only visible to those who were drawn to such things. It was a simple, rustic wooden door with a beautiful little stained glass window that shimmered with gentle shades of sapphire and emerald, scattering colourful patterns across the cobbled street. I could make out many, many books inside. Wanda was already ahead of me, drawn to the bookshop as I knew she would be, and this time she went in first, pushing open the old wooden door. I heard a tiny brass bell, and it gave a single, delicate ring before silence settled around us once more. Inside, the shop felt wonderfully peaceful, with the vast shelves of polished cedar. They reached from the floor to the ceiling, and each one was filled with beautifully bound books. I took a deep breath, savouring the way the air carried the comforting fragrance of cedar wood mingled with the rich, earthy scent of old parchment. A woman was sitting behind the counter, engrossed in a dusty-looking Agatha Christie novel. She had red hair piled up on her head, and what appeared to be hundreds of pens and pencils threaded through her bun to create the impression of a literary hedgehog. She looked up at us with a warm smile. "Hello there," she said. "My name's Saffron. Welcome to my shop. I'm guessing you're visitors to the village." "What is this place?" I asked her. It's enchanting." Saffron smiled again. "We don't really have a name," she said. She explained that long, long ago, a group of travellers discovered the hidden valley while searching for a place to rest during their journey through the mountains. They found a place with glistening streams and lush fields and decided to build a small village. They didn't name it because they didn't know how long they'd stay, but they ended up staying for hundreds of years. "And it still has no name," Saffron finished. "Somehow it never felt right." She continued her story, telling us how, as the village grew, the magic of the landscape became part of everyday life. The baker's garden produced herbs that never lost their flavour. The old trees grew in unusual shapes that sheltered the houses, and the weather seemed always to bring exactly what the village needed. "Some people say the magic comes from the mountains," she explained. I thought of nightfalls and considered the fact we seemed to have come to a place where a different strand of magic lived. I nodded. "We're delighted to be here. We both love reading, so I'm looking forward to exploring your wares." "I'm confident you'll find something just right," Saffron said. I thought I was in heaven, but then I looked over and saw Wanda's face. She was even more excited than me. Within minutes, Wanda's arms were laden with books. She sighed. "I can't get too much." "You've seen the cottage." I thought back to Lyra's cottage and laughed at Wanda's guilty expression. It was true. There were books everywhere, on their bedside tables, piled up all around on the floor, so you could dip into a tale with ease. It was so cozy, and I always found myself reading a page or two when I visited. I laughed. Frankly, you can never have too many books. Wanda nodded. "I agree, and I think we might choose some books for everyone back at the falls." We browsed the narrow aisles, and soon Wanda reached up and pulled down a huge book, groaning a little under the weight. She showed me the title, and I immediately knew why she'd chosen it and who she planned to give it to. It was a book of African folklore, and when she opened the front page to show me the contents, I saw that the book contained one of the stories Devani had told us around the campfire about thunder and lightning. I knew that story was very precious to Devani, and I was certain she would feel touched by Wanda's gesture. I flicked through the book and marvelled not at the text, as I knew Devani's tales well, but at the illustrations. They were rich with colour, and as I turned each page, I found myself surrounded by sweeping landscapes of golden savannas. I saw villages with round mud brick homes, woven baskets, patterned fabrics, and fires glowing beneath wide evening skies. The animals were drawn with a sense of wonder. Lions stood proudly beneath the stars, and big grey elephants bathed in a nearby pool. Wanda had chosen very well. I walked onwards, and the shelves seemed to stretch above us. High up, a book seemed to glow, almost otherworldly. It was a soft green light, a little like we were underwater. I kept walking onwards, drawn to the light, and eventually I was confronted by a tall wooden ladder reaching up to where the glow seemed to originate. I knew instinctively it was for me, and so I climbed up the ladder. I could smell the scent of salt in the air, and seaweed, which gave a hint of who the recipient of this chosen book could be. My hand ran over the books on the shelf up high, and I pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal. It was an inky blue, salt-scented diary of marine archaeology. I flicked through the pages. The book contained hundreds of illustrations, and they were much like the shipwrecks in Anwen's underwater world. Each page revealed an enormous vessel in the thinnest of line drawings, resting on the seabed. They were almost like architectural drawings, but the artist had filled every corner of the boat drawings with tiny, whimsical details, like additions of seashells. I closed the book and clambered down the ladder, passing it over to Wanda. I enjoyed the delight in her eyes as she flicked through the chapters. We selected books for Rhea and Arthur, and Wanda even found a sturdy volume to keep safe in the library for Alistair and Bahiti until they next wandered back to the falls. Then Wanda led me down the aisle right at the back of the shop. The long, narrow aisle was filled with books that seemed to belong to another age, with faded leather covers embossed with curling patterns and pressed flowers. I ran my hand down the book spines as we walked, enjoying the sensation, as some were bound in cloth and some were wrapped in delicate paper. Dust motes drifted through the air, and then, right at the end of the aisle, was a little reading nook hidden behind a thick velvet curtain. "Wait here," Wanda said. "I think I just saw the perfect thing for Lyra." I settled into the old armchair. The fabric felt warm and comfortable beneath me, and I wondered with a faint kind of pleasure how many books had been read in this very spot. I felt so very cozy as I sat there, waiting for Wanda, intrigued to imagine what she might conjure up. The room around me was peaceful, and a gentle fire crackled nearby, filling the space with a soft glow as I wrapped myself in a cozy blanket that was embroidered with tiny pencils. Then, Wanda appeared with a book. She handed it over, and I looked at it with a grin. The book had a satisfying heft to it, a volume on the ancient botany with illustrations of nightshade, smelling faintly of the restorative elixirs Lyra was such a pro at making. Then Wanda conjured up another slim book from behind her back and handed it over. "Who's this for?" I asked. "You," she said with a smile. I flicked through her choice with interest, and I was delighted with Wanda's pick. Indeed, I didn't think she could have chosen any better. Wanda knew about my special encyclopedia, which taught me to recognize native plants, fruits, vegetables, fungi, and nuts. The book had proved truly invaluable to me at the Falls, and this seemed to be a second volume, something I had no idea existed. I flicked through, and the book seemed to be richer in detail, with entries on deer, foxes, badgers, squirrels, everything that I saw all the time in Nightfalls. It described where they lived around the clearing and how they raised their young. There was also a very interesting looking chapter on mushrooms, mosses, and lichens, detailing the hidden relationships between forests and fungi beneath the soil. It was perfect, and I beamed at Wanda in delight. Of course, the competition between us was friendly but fierce, and it meant that now I wanted to choose something that Wanda would enjoy very much. Wanda was so well read, especially when it came to history. I remembered when I first encountered her, and I'd noted the quiet intelligence in her deep brown eyes. As the only lecturer on ancient history at Edinburgh University, she was certainly a tricky subject to shop for when it came to literature. I found myself drawn to the fiction shelves. Here, there was no order. Everything from mysteries to romance stacked up in huge piles. Some people might have found that too haphazard, but I enjoyed the lack of intentional curation. I knew the bookshop would show me the way, and so I stood there, listening. The soft sounds of the bookshop surrounded me, the whisper of pages turning, the quiet hum of the fire, and the rustle of saffron as she restocked the shelves at the front of the shop. I wandered further into the bookshop, moving between the towering shelves. The golden light from the stained glass window at the front of the shop stretched across the wooden floor, reminding me of a rainbow. Near a narrow shelf tucked between two ancient bookcases, I noticed a book that seemed to draw my attention. By this point, I realized the bookshop had very firm ideas about what Wanda and I would be taking home that day. The cover was simple, bound in deep green cloth, with delicate silver lettering pressed onto the front. There was no title written on the spine, only a small symbol of an open book surrounded by tiny stars. I lifted it carefully and opened the first page. The story inside was about a woman named Wanda. I felt a delicious sense of magic tickling up my shoulders, and it was mixed with satisfaction. I knew I'd found the perfect book. The illustration beneath the opening words showed the Wanda I knew so well, standing in a magical bookshop, her hair hanging in tight black curls around her face. Her eyes were a brilliant deep brown, full of warmth and curiosity. The depiction of Wanda was perfect, and I swear I saw the picture wink at me. I turned the page and found an image of Wanda wandering through the same kind of enchanted shop I now stood inside. In the book, she was described walking slowly between shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly, searching for books to gift to the people she loved. The book described how Wanda ran her fingertips across the spines of old novels and selected stories that reminded her of her friends. This was simply the first chapter, and I suspected there were many other tales about Wanda in the book. Though I was desperate to read them all, they belonged to her, and I closed the book with triumph. Wanda came over. "Is that for me?" she said with curiosity. I nodded and told her I would give it to her later when we handed out all the books around the fire back at the falls. And so we left with our treasures, and we stepped through the shimmering portal back towards home. Wanda and I walked with our books, and they should have been terribly heavy, but as always, magic was on our side, and they felt light as a feather in our arms. The walk back through the pines was easy, and I was heartened to see the group waiting for us in the clearing. There, we sat on the ground beside the campfire, feeling the warmth of the flames gently reaching towards us as the cool mountain air drifted. I nestled close to Devani as the everlasting campfire crackled, sending sparks rising into the darkening sky. I pulled my blanket a little closer around my shoulders as I settled into the comfort of the moment, feeling the steady rhythm of the flames and the quiet peace of the mountains surrounding us. There were just a few small sounds. The popping of the logs, distant water flowing over smooth stones, and the rustle of grass beneath our blankets. We handed out the spoils from our trip, and soon my friends were unusually quiet, each of them lost in the books they had received as gifts. Everyone rested comfortably on blankets and cushions spread across the sand, their faces glowing in the fire's orange light. Devani looked up for a moment from her book and turned to me almost shyly. I felt a warm glow at the fact that it was clear she was enjoying her book. I watched them quietly for a while, feeling a deep sense of calm settle over me. There was something wonderful about seeing people I cared about completely absorbed in stories. Stories had always drawn us together, and I strongly suspected they always would. Before I arrived at the falls, I'd always been someone who found great joy in the quieter parts of life, happy to spend much of my time reading, and I had long been content with familiar places and my books. Then, the moment I came across Nightfalls, I'd become so much more adventurous. I was starting to realize that both sides of my being could exist, and that was normal and natural. I felt so relaxed at this thought, and lulled by the familiar scent of the pines and the steady sound of the waterfall close by. I settled down, feeling completely at peace as sleep came. We'll leave our story there for tonight. I feel all sleepy now. Maybe it's time for a quick afternoon nap. Sleep well and sweet dreams.